What's up, champs? Welcome to another episode of the Short Shifts Fantasy Hockey Podcast, brought to you by Keeping Karlsson. I'm Jeremy Versillo. Joining me tonight, my pal and yours, Shams Benamor. How are you doing on this fine Thursday evening, Shams? And how is your cupful draft going?
Oh, it's going well. It's one of those dances of, I love slow drafts just because you get to overthink everything, but it's annoying because you overthink everything. Because right now, it's pretty happy with my draft. I'm in the middle of the pick order. I got the 8th pick, but I ended up with Rantanen as my first overall or first round pick. So I was happy to get a powerful forward there. And had Ovechkin come down to me and Gensel as my third round. So really happy that I was able to bag out 3 strong wingers. So overall, pretty fine. Now, the only thing, and this is where the old overthinking comes in, is that I know we keep on talking about how right wing's shallow, but it just never hit me until I got later to the draft. So right now, I only have Rantanen and Kempe as my right wings. And then thinking about it more is I took Ehlers as one of my third left wing. And then seeing that Marchessault got picked later in the 7th round, I'm now just second guessing myself that maybe I should have a right wing, my third one, because now I'm waiting on my 11th round pick and I still only have Kempe and Rantanen, my right wings.
Well, we get to root for Mikko Rantanen together this year, as I took Rantanen with the 6th overall pick. You mentioned the dearth of right wings this year. I lucked into 3 consecutive right wings to start my draft, so I'm sitting at 4 through 10 rounds, so I'm sitting pretty there. As usual with me, I have terrible defense and no goaltending, so you can see how I like to play fantasy. And every time I think I'm going to get a defenseman, someone snipes him from me.
You're preaching to the choir.
Preaching to the choir here. Let's get into the news. There was a big injury announcement today. Why don't you tell us about that, Shams?
So Vasilevskiy is out for approximately 2 months with a back. It seems like a minor back injury, or at least surgery. So we'll see how things go. Victor Nuno, friend of the Keeping Karlsson family, says that it is something that he agrees will be within the 2-month range. So the dance is that while it's nice that it's only 2 months, it does put them in a predicament that they can't just throw them on long-term IR and then just have all that cap space available. So right now they're always sitting at $1 million of cap space, and then they have to fix this issue with only that cap space, or they'll be over the cap once Vasilevskiy comes back. So right now, they literally have Jonas Johansson as the only goalie that I actually recognize by name, and I recognize him by name for the wrong reasons, as goalies on their squad. So it's going to be an interesting dance to see what they do if they pick up a random goalie off the waiver wire, because a lot of teams are carrying 3. For example, Spencer Martin just got waived by Vancouver. But right now, it's really just so fresh that nothing has been done. But you can tell me if you disagree, but I have zero interest in spending any draft capital at the moment. Jonas Johansson, because I have a feeling they're either going to try to replace him, or he's probably not even going to do that well anyway. So unless you're in a league where every starting goalie gets picked up and used, I would be probably looking elsewhere before just coming right over and saying, hey, I got Johansson.
I agree with you for the most part. If you could guarantee me that Jonas Johansson was getting 60 or 70% of the starts, I would probably take him. He's not a great goalie, but he's behind a great team that is going to win a lot of games with a pretty good defensive core. So I wouldn't be too worried about the fantasy performance. Would I take him in the 15th, 16th round? Absolutely. But I have to think that they're either going to plug the hole from somewhere else, such as Spencer Martin, or a trade for one of these goalies like Dan Vladar, who is in a weird situation in Calgary, or they're going to split him 50-50 with their prospect, Hugo Alnefelt, a Swedish kid who I think is 22 or 23-year-old, has had some good international numbers and is generally considered a high-end goalie prospect. Maybe we'll see some of him this year. But for the most part, this just sucks for Vasilevskiy drafters, and I'm not interested in any of the replacements, which is really weird to say given how good Tampa is.
I agree. It's like most of us weren't really rushing to say, like, pick up Brian Elliott when he was getting the backup duties last year or two. So the way I look at it is that you knew that he was going to get those starts and whatnot, that, like, we'll see what happens. And he's going to be back in 2 months. That, yeah, I'm with you. Late round pick, like one of your last ones that you'll kind of want to just like ride him, maybe. But I have a feeling that someone's going to just see the hype of just, oh, I could get the starter for Tampa. And they're going to spend too much draft capital that you're not going to have the opportunity. That sneaky late pick. But if you do, well, I don't like it too much. I wouldn't fret doing that.
Speaking of draft capital, how far down your board do you push Vasilevskiy in drafts that haven't started yet? Keeping in mind that I believe Jake Gensel, who's only missing a couple games, is going in about the 3rd round, and Brandon Montour I've seen going in the 7th and 8th rounds in most cupful drafts. Where do you have Vasilevskiy now? The 6th, the 7th?
This is going to be one of those things, is that I'm probably not the best person to speak to because I think all goalies are voodoo and I like to wait as long as possible. So I think it's going to be one of those situations that I wouldn't have a particular spot in mind. And then what I would do is just kind of gauge how the rest of your drafters are going and then see if he's like starting to plummet. Like, say if there's like 4 or 5 goalies taken and then you feel good about your draft. It's one of those things of just like how you feel about the draft at the time and then like how much variance you want to take. Because by the sounds of it, it doesn't seem too serious, and hopefully he's going to be back to normal Vasi when the 2 months is gone. So it's not like a knee injury where you're like, oh, is he going to recover, or Achilles? So I feel like I'm not too interested because I don't like to take that kind of risk of just saying, hey, I don't have a player for 2 months and spending, top half of the draft pick. Because at least with Gensel, it's like, okay, I might be missing a month at most. So, but either way, if you're a little risky, I still maybe take him 6th or 7th, depending on your settings. But it's really just kind of dependent on how the rest of the draft board goes.
I agree with you. What I'm seeing in most drafts today is there's a group of 7 goaltenders at the top, which is Shesterkin, Vasilevskiy, Ottinger, Sorokin, Hellebuck, Georgiev, Saros. And then there's like a 2-round gap before any other goalies go. I would still take Vasilevskiy before the 8th goalie off the board, which looks like Demko or Skinner or Samsonov. But I would absolutely drop him closer to that second group than that first group. Up next, we have, I guess we'll call it an injury, even though it's more of a future outjury. You have a public service announcement about one Patrick Kane.
Do not draft Patrick Kane. Maybe with like your last pick, I won't do it. I was joking with others. You couldn't pay me to pick him up out of free agency. It's that I understand. We all saw that video. He looks limber. Keep in mind, that was from his agent. It's designed to look good. It's one of these situations that everyone just thinks of the past. Yes, he was great at one part, but the keep in mind is that you need so many things to go right in succession for this to work. The first thing to keep in mind is that since he's not on a team, you cannot put him on IR. So until he gets signed, he's going to have to sit on your active roster, earning a spot. And before he's going to get signed, he actually has to be fully healthy. So first, get fully healthy. Second, get signed. Third, get signed by a team that's actually good and can use him. Then get deployment that actually is good, not be like random third line, second power play. And then once all of that lines up, then he actually has to be good. Think of how many players would you try to go through that many hoops. If you took off his name, no one would be thinking about doing this. Stop thinking about the past. Think about what he actually has to do in the future, which is a lot, to have a chance to produce for your team. Just save yourself the headache. Wait until some of those things happen. So maybe you get signed, something, and then just have him on your watch list and maybe think about picking up then. Don't be spending your roster spots right now on someone that has so much that they have to cover before having a chance to do anything for your team.
The only time I would stash Patrick Kane is if I was able to put him in an IR slot. If for some reason he signs in Buffalo, which is the rumor of the day, if he signs in Buffalo tomorrow, yeah, I'd draft him in the 13th or 14th round, throw him in my IR slot, of which I have 4, and see what happens when he comes back. But to waste a bench slot for 2 or 3 months on him is crazy town. I also want to point out that Patrick Kane's injury was a hip resurfacing surgery. The other big-name player who went through that recently is Nicklas Backstrom. And if you watched any Capitals games last year, Nicklas Backstrom is a completely different player than he was before the surgery. Like, I think this is a career-altering, long recovery type of surgery for Patrick Kane, who is 35 years old.
I am 100% with you there, is that if he was somewhere to be put on IR, then you could play the Ekblad, the Pacioretty, the Montour game. And while I'm not the biggest fan of trying to play that game, I can see where you're going. But the second you're telling me that I have to spend a roster spot while playing this game, I have zero interest. So side with you.
Real quick before the break, I want to run through a couple of interesting preseason line combos and see if you have opinions on any of them. I am reticent to really pay attention to preseason line combos because a lot of the veterans sit out. There's all these split squad games, but here's some that looked moderately interesting. Number 1, Adam Fantilli was on Power Play 1 with Laine, Gaudreau, Jenner, and Werenski. Second, Bobby Brink was playing first line with Farabee and Couturier and Power Play 1. Third, the Rangers lines had Lafreniere on the first line with Zib and Kreider, Panarin, Hedl, and Wheeler, and then VC, Trocheck, and Kakko. Pavel Zacha on Power Play 1 in Boston, Jonathan Drouin on the first line with McKinnon and Rantanen, and also in Colorado, Ryan Johansson was playing Power Play 1 with Lehkonen, McKinnon, and Rantanen. Any of those really stand out to you, or is this just a bunch of noise to sift through that we shouldn't care about?
For me, I think the big thing for me is that, I'll be perfectly honest, I've never been the biggest fan of Nichushkin, just because of, while he has time and has played well, is that now with the lack of a real second line in Colorado, is that people are like, oh, he's just going to get the power play. And that's just kind of, and the fact that they're trying this, as we say, this could change tomorrow, but it's just more of just that, just another just kind of demerit point to put when you're looking at Nichushkin versus somebody else. If you're looking for that position spot, it's just that Power Play 1 is not guaranteed for him. And while it's a great team, you got to remember, line 2 is Johansson and Lehkonen, because they do have, as we've seen before, McKinnon and Rantanen as together, that sure, he may end up replacing Druid, but there's a lot of, well, it could happen, but with the kind of the draft picks that you have to spend, I'm just wary that I might want to take something a little certain.
I think that's a good point, and especially when you were mentioning the power play, one of the big things that teams like to do on Power Play 1 is to have 2 centers on it, Because if your main center gets kicked out of the faceoff, you've got a winger taking the faceoff. And in Colorado's case, that's Mikko Rantanen, who played center some last year, but also isn't very good at the faceoffs. Meanwhile, now they can put Ryan Johansson, who was a 59% faceoff guy last year, and honestly, he may take the faceoffs over McKinnon, because on a power play, starting in the offensive zone, possession is everything. So I agree with you that Nichushkin is no lock for power play 1 anymore, and he's probably fighting Lehkonen for it. I think, if anything, Johansson's a lock for it, which doesn't really make him interesting because he doesn't shoot, he doesn't score, he kind of hits, I guess. But yeah, be very careful of the secondary pieces in Colorado this year. There's no longer a guaranteed power play 1 slot for them.
Yeah, without Landeskog, the second line just disappears of interest.
2 other quick notes here that I know you had mentioned to me when we were talking beforehand. I am completely out on Vincent Trocheck this year. I had a great time drafting him late last year. He did good things for my teams, especially in banger leagues. But with the young guys getting older and Wheeler in the mix, I'm not sure I want Vincent Trocheck on any of my teams this year, especially if he's playing third line with VC and Kakko. And last but not least, I think Fantilli on power play 1 is interesting. I don't think he's as good as Bedard, but I think he could be a fantasy relevant rookie this year in, the late round pick and somehow stays on your roster all year, or is just a very good streamer for your league.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like, to be perfectly honest, I was not thinking about Fantilli too much for camp, but I'm with you now that he is definitely one of those. The way I like to approach my drafts is that the farther into the draft that you get, more risk tolerance I take. So this is a guy that you could definitely draft late in the draft. And then the nice thing is you can see if the deployment's there, and then if he's able to make something out of that deployment, and then make that decision of, is he going to be a hit that you want to keep, or if it just turns out that they randomly send him to like the minors, or he's just like, something's not working, then you could just drop with confidence. It's not one of those things where you need to like hold for 3 months and then see what happens. So that's the kind of bets I like making late in drafts.
And that is a great segue into our break, because after the break, we're going to come up with some sleepers for you. And one of the big things with these sleepers is guys that if they don't hit, you will know immediately and you can drop them for streamers. We'll see you on the other side. Welcome back. As promised, Shams and I are going to dig into a couple of quote-unquote sleepers who we are defining as someone in Fantrax who's about the 12th round or later. So think ADP 180 all the way into, I have a guy who is ADP 1605, and you're going to laugh at me for that one, but that's just a little teaser for later. Shams, why don't you tell me about your 2 forward sleepers who you're thinking about?
So my first one is a little bit higher on the ADP, but it's Brock Besser. And really the reason I'm bringing him up is that I was talking earlier when we were talking about the draft picks that we were making and whatnot in our leagues, and right wing is a commodity. And the way I look at Brock Besser is that, yes, we remember his past. He has the injuries. There's that unfortunate just personal matters that he was going through. The last few years hasn't been the greatest for a myriad of issues. However, he seems to be healthy. And the nice thing is that while he is on line 2 for Vancouver, it's not your average line 2. He's playing with JT Miller, who's getting drafted in the second round in a lot of places, and I think probably most leagues. So it's like you getting like a first line kind of quality with your player. And then there's also a window possibly, and this is kind of the awkward part with camp, is that they haven't really had a full squad power practice, so we don't know about power play 1. So he does have a possibility of sneaking into power play 1 and playing with JT Miller in the 5v5 matchup. So those together, and honestly, depending on how they are offensively, I could even live with Besser as a power play 2 if JT Miller and him link up enough on 5v5. And then that idea is that with the right wing, it has a potential of just filling in that slot as your like third right wing that like maybe he's not your everyday starter, but could fill in some quality minutes.
That's a good shout out, especially with Bo Horvat gone. I mean, last year when the Islanders made the trade for him, Vancouver was kind of all over the place. It was a little bit of chaos. But remember, Bo Horvat, for before the last 2 years, was a 65 to 75 point player who took 2.5 to 3 shots per game. If he ends up back on power play 1, he could return to that. Like, he would be a rosterable fantasy asset in Cupful with just a quick return to power play 1 and a 65 point pace. That's not that far off from what he's been doing. And he's only 26. He's a good player.
Oh yeah, for sure. And that's one of the things is that with that 5v5 with Miller, is I feel like you can give a little bit of leash and then we can see how things go. Is that if he gets like starting to get like randomly get bumped to third line or the power play thing falls apart, then you can start questioning. But as long as he's doing enough on that second line, I will be open to giving him a little.
You had a second sleeper, one who's a bit deeper. Who were you thinking about here for your forward sleeper?
So this is a one where you're going to be spending your time on game day tweets. Is that right now, everyone loves Bedard. Everything you see that he's doing, I see it's like every time he hits the ice, you got a video that you need to see. So the idea is we all know that Taylor Hall is his left wing. Now, the question was previously at the start of camp, there's Taylor Radish was kind of the first person to be the right wing. However, to be perfectly honest, I couldn't find the news, but he hasn't been practicing at all. And, not really much information about him. However, there is another player, Ryan Donato, who is now taking his place both on line 1 and power play 1. So the idea is that this is more of you're taking a bite of Bedard, and I would be interested in a late round pick, assuming that he stays there. So what the idea is that you're just going to have to kind of pay attention to the news, see once Radish comes back, or if there's more clarity, say he's out for a long time, or he comes back and he's like playing third line for some whatever reason, Donato keeps that position. Donato would be a position that I would be taking as a later round pick. And the idea is that right now it's weird with Yahoo. He currently shows as a center, but during all of practice, he's been playing his right wing. So I would ignore that center eligibility and then be of the expectation that he's going to get the right wing eligibility by the time the season starts. So hopefully what you could use that as your kind of back pocket, that someone's not loading up by name and only looking at position. They might not even see him, and then you can sneak him in the late rounds and then have your nice stash of Bedard line mate.
I agree with you. I want anybody who's playing with Bedard. I'm having watched Ryan Donato last year on the Kraken. I don't think it's going to be Ryan Donato, but if it's him right now, that's the guy you should draft in the 18th round and stream for Chicago's really good early schedule. But here's a list of other guys that probably will play with Bedard at some point this season. Tyler Johnson, Andreas Athanasiou, Nick Foligno, Corey Perry, Philip Kurashev, Colin Blackwell. Believe it or not, I would roster any of those players if they were playing with Bedard and Hall. It sounds kind of silly, but just throw your darts at Blackhawks right wings to start the season. Worst case, they're a 3-game streamer. Best case, you get a Bedard line mate who gets you like 25 points in the first week.
It's basically like how we talk about McDavid of like, oh, Cassian's playing with them and all of these just random people that you would have zero interest with. And I know it's a little too early, but a lot of people are making the connection. It's that same idea is you want the player playing with the best players because they're going to get points alongside them. Same idea here.
For my two sleepers, my first one is Gabe Vilardi, the newly minted Winnipeg Jet who got traded from LA this offseason. He's been riding shotgun with Kyle Connor and Mark Scheifele and been playing Power Play 1. Vilardi was all the rage to start last season when he got off to a scorching October with LA. He cooled off a bit towards the middle or end of the season and was borderline streamer roster guy. But with good deployment and stepping into his age 24 season, I think there's a chance Vilardi takes another step and becomes a consistent producer to replace the Blake Wheeler and the Pierre-Luc Dubois of the world that Winnipeg lost.
And the nice thing is that I know we joke about preseason and whatnot, but from what I saw, there was a nice clip going around of a nice tic-tac-toe play between Vilardi and his two line mates, and it just looks like that there's already chemistry kind of brewing, so it's not one of those situations where they stuck a player on a great line and he's stumbling with two left feet. It kind of shows signs that it could work, so hopefully he gets there, spends some time, and then can keep that spot. And just to kind of add to Vilardi, he's in that same situation as Donato. For some reason, he's only a center on Yahoo. I would expect the same, and then maybe another backdoor way that you might be able to sneak a round or two, depending on how informed your weak mates are.
For those of you who aren't familiar with Vilardi, as he kind of was a bit of a late breakout onto the scene that not a lot of people had heard of, he was a high-end prospect in his age 16 and 17 seasons in juniors, had quite a bit of draft hype and stuff, but unfortunately fought some concussion type issues. He was 11th overall in 2017 and then played 32 games in 17-18, 4 games in 18-19, and only 42 in 19-20 between all of the levels. So I think there was a bit of concern at one point that he would never be the same player. But he really looks like he's gotten himself back on track and is showing that former first rounder type of upside. So I'm very bullish on Vilardi as a long-term 60-point NHL player. My other sleeper is someone who I'm actually really surprised we haven't heard much about. I haven't seen much chat in the Keeping Karlsson Discord. I haven't seen a lot of beat writers or podcasts pumping him up. But Ryan O'Reilly is 2 years removed from a 70-point season and is playing first line and first power play with Philip Forsberg. Why aren't we talking about this guy more?
I think it's sadly the market that he's in is that Nashville, honestly, and Emma Lindgren is great, but I think she's literally the only person I see that talks about her as a beat writer for the team. So it's one of those situations that only so much news comes out. I won't joke, or I'm not lying, is that I think it was earlier this week, I legitimately found out that Gurianov is on the team. I had no clue he was on the team. And the only reason I knew that he was on the team is he's the third wing, the third player on the O'Reilly-Forsberg line that they just did in practice. It's just one of those situations that I guess the team's just not getting a lot of national publication, but I'm with you, is that a lot of people like Forsberg. I like Forsberg, and O'Reilly is no slouch of himself that they could possibly do something together. Going to be one of those things that I'm not sure where I draft him, but I have a feeling that he's going to do much better than where he's being drafted. And that's sadly a little bit more on he's probably getting underdrafted, but I feel like he should be on more teams or more radars, at least than what he is at this moment.
Yeah, you say you're not sure where you draft him, but would you draft him in the late 15th round?
Honestly, now that you're saying this, it's I drafted Suzuki as my third center at the moment. That now that you say that maybe I would have been better off just waiting on that draft pick and then trying to sneak in a O'Reilly later.
That's kind of my point here, is that O'Reilly isn't flashy. He isn't sexy. He doesn't shoot a lot. He doesn't hit a lot. He's honestly a very frustrating fantasy player to own, but he's also going in the back end of the 15th round for a guy who's first line, first power play with a very good winger, Philip Forsberg. I'm just shocked that he kind of just isn't going anywhere. It actually kind of reminds me of Matt Duchene, how he was really good last year in Nashville, or 2 years ago in Nashville. O'Reilly could do the same thing and have a mid-career revival fueled by playing with a good line mate on a team that's desperate for scoring. Next up, we've got some sleeper defensemen for you. I'll go first here, and I've got a pair of defensemen, and I'm just going to lead into this saying the two obvious power play quarterbacks on the Florida Panthers, Brandon Montour and Aaron Ekblad, are both going to return, quote, between November and January. Don't ask me how that timetable makes sense. Between November and January is a very large range. But someone has to run the power play in the meantime. I see a lot of people assuming that it's going to be Gustav Forsling, who is going in the 11th round on average. Don't get me wrong. Forsling's a very good player. I like watching him. I think he's their best defenseman currently. But I don't think he's guaranteed the power play one slot. He's probably the odds-on favorite. But if you want some absolutely free shots to take that you can drop if they don't get power play one, Oliver Ekman-Larsson, ADP of 406, was playing on the power play in some of the preseason games. And also that's like a nice cushy veteran job to give him. Additionally, Mike Riley, ADP 1605, got added by Florida on a 1-year contract this year. Now, I don't think Riley's going to make the team, but if he does, he will definitely see power play time. So if you're in a deeper league, a 16 to 18 team league, or maybe a dynasty where you're trying to fill out your last few bench slots, or if you're just in the last round of the cupful and want to take a shot, if either of those guys play power play one in Florida, they are fantasy relevant until Montour and Ekblad come back. Shams, do you think I'm crazy for these, or do you prefer one over the other? What's your thoughts?
I'm 100% on board with this because I'm generally not a fan of drafting defensemen too early. And then the idea is that there's so much variance. So the idea is what I love about the OEL and the Mike Riley is that you can hit big and you don't have to invest too much. And then if they don't, sure, you can get your Jeff Petrie that hits and blocks and might sneak into a goal or something off the waiver wire because you spent your last round pick on Mike Riley or something of the sort. So I'm definitely on that board. And then kind of the idea is that I would lean OEL since he has spent some time there. But honestly, depending on how deep your league is, and you're talking about like those dynasty things and whatnot, is that I'm not too familiar with that setup, that I have a feeling that Mike Riley's contract is so minimal that even if he doesn't do anything or gets cut, it's not going to like have massive repercussions. That is a lottery ball that I would be interested in. So to kind of go on that idea is that my two sleeper D are that same idea of there's not a lot of information out and they could end up hitting big. The first one is Scott Perunovich for the St. Louis Blues. He's currently being drafted at 378. He's a prospect with them that has had some pedigree, but the idea is that he's been injured a lot and hasn't really had the chance to really perform. So the idea is that what I really like about Perunovich is that he had a little bit of power play time in the past. And then also this is Berube, the coach, who literally, I think this was either tonight or yesterday, said he hasn't played a lot in recent years due to the injuries. And we wanted to see how he performs, put him in good situations to see how he handles it, power plays and things like that. So they're purposely trying to see how good he is. So the idea is that we're going to put him in the power play, and I think he spent some power play time today, and then that to see where he is, because to be perfectly honest, right now they have Torrey Krug and Justin Falk, which are not the biggest, they're not, Adam Fox or someone that has a stranglehold on the power play. So there is a chance that he could sneak into that. And they do have some nice players that it may not be the deepest team, but if they ends up on a power play with Kyrou, Thomas, and Vishnevich, I would be very interested in the defenseman of that power play unit. What do you think?
I agree with you. To me, any power play one defenseman is worth holding. Even Kalen Addison last year, who was a net zero other than playing the power play, he was worth owning until he got cut. Perunovic also has, similar to Velarde, who we talked about earlier, has that high-end pedigree, but quite a bit of injury history. So why not take a shot on him? Or on your other guy, who I think is a similar situation.
Yeah, same idea. A young guy, Cam York. He has a little bit higher of a ADP to keep in mind, but still not high. It's basically 224. Young guy, spent a little bit of time in the major, but not too much. And then the idea here is that off the top of my head, I believe it's Travis Sanheim and Ristolainen are the two most likely. Maybe Sean Walker. I think he spent some time on a power play with the Kings. There's absolutely no one that has a clear path for the mantle. And then Cam York has that kind of offensive pedigree to go with it. So it's going to be interesting to see is that how to go. And this is going to be one of those pay attention to the lines, see how things happen, but it's going to be one of those, the competition's not great, so maybe he sneaks in, and then they do have some pieces as well, Konechny, and let's see how Couturier goes, and Atkinson looks to be healthy, that they do have some forwards that could do some damage, and Cam York could kind of piggyback off of that.
The nice thing about Cam York is he's also not a total zero on peripherals. He had 44 hits and 69 blocks in 54 games last year. So, about a hit and a block per game if you average it out. I will say, though, maybe I'm just pessimistic, but it's Tortorella there. He's going to put Ristolainen on the power play for no reason at all, which would be a great fantasy own, but my God, that would be terrible to watch. And I think he's going to do it because it's Tortorella.
He somehow got power play time with the Sabres, and they'll probably point to that, and I'm with you. So out of the two, I would be more, it's funny, is that Perunovic has the worst ADP, but I feel like he has a better hit rate, even though he has stronger competition, just because I have an idea that Berube, I trust him more to play the better player, so I'm with you. Sadly, Risto might actually end up somehow there. So, as mentioned before, these are lottery balls. Your scratch off is not 100% win rate, so make sure that if you're going to invest in these guys, that you're not spending too much capital on the gambling.
Well, that's all we have time for tonight. Thank you for joining us. Be sure to give us a follow at Short Shifts KK, as well as Brian and Elon at Keepin' Carlson. I also recommend you follow at Game Day Lines, at Game Day Goalies, at Game Day News NHL, and at Game Day Stats NHL, all organized nicely at the site www.gamedaytweets.com. Visit that site and the other great sites we use to research our episodes with at Yahoo, Frozen Tools, and Natural Stat Trick. Our intro and outro music were created by Pat Roach, and John Reed is our digital media producer. Until we see you next time, play smart and keep your shifts short.